You walked into a room today. You couldn't tell me what color the walls were. You couldn't tell me how many people were in it. You definitely couldn't tell me what any of them were wearing. A detective walks into the same room, leaves, and can reconstruct every detail from memory without writing a single thing down. Same room, same eyes, completely different brain output. This isn't talent. This is a system. And once you know it, you will never look at anything the same way again. In 1887, Arthur Conan Doyle created Sherlock Holmes, but he didn't invent him from imagination. He based Holmes on a real man, Dr. Joseph Bell. Bell was a surgeon at the University of Edinburgh. He could look at a patient who had never spoken a word to him and tell you their occupation, where they travelled, what hand they favoured, what they were anxious about. His students thought it was supernatural. It wasn't. Bell had a rule. Most people look, but they do not observe. Scotland Yard eventually hired Bell as a consultant. Real detectives, real cases, real results. The system Bell used has a name now, and it's teachable. Here's what you do when you enter a room. You scan. You get a vague impression. You move on. Your brain is doing something called passive seeing, taking in light, registering motion, filtering out everything it decides isn't urgent. It evolved to do this. It's efficient. It's also why you remember almost nothing. Detectives train something different. Active observation. The difference is intentional layering. Neuroscientist Daniel Levitin, in his 2014 research on expert attention, found that experts don't see more. They organize what they see in real time into hierarchical categories. Here's the ladder. Layer 1. Environment. What is the space? Size, light, exits, anomalies. Layer 2. People. How many? Where positioned? What they're doing with their hands. Layer 3. Deviation. What doesn't fit? The thing's slightly out of place. Most people never get past Layer 1. Detectives start at Layer 3. That's the entire gap, but observation alone won't save you, because you can see everything and still forget it in 4 minutes. Hermann Ebbinghaus mapped the forgetting curve in 1885. Within 20 minutes, you forget 40% of what you just saw. Within an hour, 56%. Within 24 hours, 74%. Detectives know this, so they don't just observe. They encode on contact. Here's how. The moment you see something important, you attach a verbal tag to it. Not a note. A word, out loud or in your head. Blue jacket, left pocket bulging, keeps checking the door. Cognitive psychologist Elizabeth Loftus spent 40 years studying eyewitness memory at UC Irvine. Her finding, the moment you label something, you dramatically increase recall. Naming activates a second memory pathway, semantic memory, on top of visual memory. 2 pathways encoding the same thing. Twice the retention. She also found the opposite. People who saw without labeling were easily manipulated into misremembering details that never existed. Seeing without tagging is unreliable by design. The FBI teaches new agents a drill called the 30-second snapshot. You enter a space. You have 30 seconds. You verbally tag everything significant, out loud if possible. You leave. You write it down. You go back in. You check what you missed. You do this every day for 30 days. By week 3, agents report remembering details from rooms they weren't consciously trying to memorize. The system becomes automatic. If you're watching this and thinking, I could never do that, you're wrong. You're already doing a version of it. Every time you walk into a room and immediately find your friend in a crowd, your brain already has the hardware. It's just untrained. If this is the kind of thing you want more of, hit subscribe. Every video on this channel is one system the top performers use, broken down so you can actually use it. Observation gets you the data. Encoding looks at in short term, but detectives need information days later, weeks later. In court, that requires a third step, active reconstruction. Every evening, interrogators and detectives are trained to do a mental replay of the day, not journaling, not summarizing. Scene reconstruction. Closing your eyes and walking back through a location or conversation in sequence. Harvard psychologist Daniel Schacter, in his 2001 book, The 7 Senses of Memory, identified that the brain doesn't store memories like files. It stores reconstruction cues. Every time you mentally replay a scene, you strengthen those cues. Every time you skip the replay, they degrade. This is why detectives who debrief immediately after a scene remember it accurately for months, and civilian eyewitnesses who don't begin confabulating within 48 hours, filling gaps with logic, not memory. The reconstruction loop takes 4 minutes. Eyes closed. Walk through the space again. What do you see? What were people wearing? What were they doing? What was out of place? Then open your eyes. Write down what surfaced. Marcus Aurelius did a version of this every night. He called it the evening review. He wasn't a detective, but he understood that a mind that doesn't audit itself loses itself. You don't have bad memory. You have untrained observation. The gap between you and a detective isn't supernatural perception. It's 3 habits. Layer, label, replay. Layer what you see. Label it immediately. Replay it before you sleep. Do this for 2 weeks. You will not recognize the version of yourself that walks into a room, but here's the problem. You can now observe everything, label everything, reconstruct everything, and still, when it matters most, your brain will go blank. High stakes, real pressure, and suddenly everything you practice disappears. That's not a memory problem, that's a retrieval problem under stress, and it has a completely different solution. The CIA figured it out first. That video is already on this channel.